welcome you all to the Institute for Defense Analyses. I'm Nordy Schwartz, the president of IDA, and we're grateful for your participation in this very important event. IDA is an independent, nonprofit research organization, and our mission is to tackle the most challenging national security enterprise issues with rigorous decision quality analysis for those who carry the current burden of public service. We're honored to have been chosen by the 2022-2023 Congressional Commission on the strategic posture of the United States as its supporting activity. The Commission's remit was certainly broad and its challenge daunting, quote, to examine and make recommendations to the President and to the Congress with respect to the long-term strategic posture of the United States. To be able to provide the Commission with the analytic support necessary to fulfill that charter these past 15 months was a distinct privilege. Welcome all to this rollout of the Commission's final report. Thank you.
Thank you, General Schwartz. I'm Bill Chambers. I'm a member of the Strategy, Forces, and Resources Division here at IDA, and I serve as the Executive Director for this commission. This commission, the Strategic Posture Commission, which is the shorthand name of it, was established by the FY22 NDAA. And as General Schwartz described, it was to conduct a review of the strategic posture of the U.S., including a strategic threat assessment, and make recommendations with respect to the most appropriate strategic posture. The Commission has completed a report that fulfills that remit, and their report is threat-based, forward-looking, comprehensive, and nonpartisan. The entire Commission is here to describe their findings and recommendations. The chairperson of the Strategic Posture Commission is the Honorable Madeleine Creedon. The vice chairperson of the Commission is Senator John Kyle. The other commissioners from my far left, Dr. Gloria Duffy, then the Honorable Marshall Billingsley, then the Honorable Rose Gottmiller, then the Honorable Lisa Gordon-Haggerty, then General John Hyden. To the right of the chairperson is the Honorable Frank Miller, then the Honorable Robert Schur, then Dr. Matt Kronig, then Miss Leonore Tamaro, then Rebecca Heinrichs. Allow me to present an overview of how this event is going to be run and give you some guidelines for the Q&A. As you can tell, we are capturing a recording of the event, and we'll be posting the recording online afterwards. Regarding some security, some reminders. This is an unclassified venue. This is an unclassified event, and the Commission's report is an unclassified document. If there's an emergency while we're in this room during our time together, please exit the same doors you entered, turn right toward the turnstiles, and you'll see a street entrance, and go outside through that exit on the street on Glebe Road. And there are many security officers present to assist if anything happens. Here's how we'll proceed. First, the chairperson and vice chairperson will in turn offer remarks introducing the Commission's results. Next, the other 10 commissioners will have an opportunity to offer very brief opening comments. We will then open it up to a Q&A session and request you follow a few simple guidelines as you think of questions to ask. Please get my attention, and when I indicate it's your turn, please stand, wait for a microphone. We have people that will hand you a microphone, then state your name, identify your organization, and ask your question. At the end of the event, you'll be given a link for the Commission's report, and that link is now active as of 11 o'clock, and you will all have an opportunity to access it immediately. We'll now proceed. Madeline, over to you for introductory remarks.
Thanks, Bill. And thank you, General Schwartz, and also thank you to the whole IDA team. This report was, to say the least, a bit of a heavy lift, and we never could have done it without all of the help and lots of overtime and lots of long nights from the IDA team, specifically Bill Chambers, who was our executive director, and then our two leads, Dr. Caroline Milne and Dr. Rihanna Hutton, and just everybody who helped. It really was a tremendous amount of support. So with that, I just want to say good morning and thank you all for coming. Releasing this report today is more timely than many of us had originally expected. Our report, consistent with our statutory charge, was, as General Schwartz indicated, to conduct a review of the strategic posture of the United States, including a strategic threat assessment and a detailed review of nuclear weapons policy, strategy, and force structure, and factors affecting the strategic stability of near-peer competitors of the United States. We are all keenly aware, however, that the threat of terrorism, including the possibility of nuclear terrorism, has not gone away. And I just want to make that clear, even though that's not included in our report, because it was not our remit. We certainly are all quite conscious of that. But I also want to make it clear today that the report we are releasing is a threat-informed, forward-looking, nonpartisan consensus report. And I think that's extraordinarily relevant today, that it is, in fact, a consensus report. The report provides high-level guidance to shape future decision-making and generally refrains from choosing specific systems. We provide characteristics of recommended capabilities, but generally do not pick winners and losers. The time frame for the report is 2027 and beyond, looking at least to 2035. We all know the threats from China and Russia are each different, but each are growing rapidly. And the hopeful environment and vision of widespread nuclear reductions from a decade ago is no longer realistic. That said, if there are opportunities for arms control or other strategic stability talks, which might include mill-to-mill talks, any actions that we could take to reduce the risk, or other opportunities to establish norms, they should all be explored. Today, the U.S. is on the cusp of a fundamentally different global setting for which we did not plan and are not well prepared. Confronting two nuclear peers is unprecedented. The nation must act now and with a sense of urgency that the Commission did not always see. Steps need to be taken now to enable both near and future decisions. It's essential that what the U.S. does, again now and in the next few years, enables the flexibility that will be needed to reshape the conventional and nuclear force structures, and that we not foreclose options that might be needed in the future. There are 5 assumptions that underpin our report. The first, Russia and China will continue on their current respective adversarial paths, each growing the quality and quantity of their nuclear arsenals. China will continue to grow its conventional forces, including its space and cyber capabilities, and Russia will also grow its space and cyber capabilities. Each will continue their aggressive foreign policies and seek to supplant the U.S. global leadership role. Today's one major war strategy construct is no longer viable, particularly given China's current trajectory. And long-standing U.S. objectives that shape nuclear employment guidance and planning remain valid. Strong allies and partners are essential and make us all stronger together. But we need greater cooperation, greater coordination, and greater integration. The U.S. deterrent must be credible and seen that way by our adversaries as well as our allies and partners. And in addition, the U.S. needs a true whole-of-government approach to deterrence, and we must prepare for the possibility of a two-theater conflict, even if one of those conflicts is opportunistic. The U.S. strategy must effectively deter and defeat simultaneous aggression in two theaters. China can no longer be considered a lesser-included case for force structure planning, and nuclear and conventional force sizing and composition must account for the possibility of combined aggression from Russia and China. From a force structure perspective, the U.S. nuclear modernization program of record must be fully implemented as rapidly as possible to deter Russia and China. The program of record is necessary, but not sufficient to address the projected threat. If Russia and China stay on their current trajectories, and nothing we saw would indicate such a change, the composition of the force must change. There is a growing risk of confrontation with China, Russia, or both. This includes the risk of military conflict, including the possibility of nuclear use. In order to deter and prevent nuclear conflict, the U.S. must increase its conventional forces quantitatively and qualitatively, adopt a more resilient space architecture, modernize nuclear command and control, and advance integrated air and missile defense capabilities. We recognize that each theater is different and will require different forces. Thus, flowing forces from one theater to another may be necessary, but is not a substitute for needed increases in conventional capabilities and forces. Without more conventional forces to deter regional wars, the use of nuclear weapons regionally becomes more likely. Without significant conventional increases, the U.S. will need to rely more on nuclear weapons and thus increasing the role of nuclear weapons rather than decreasing their role. While a large-scale nuclear conflict remains unlikely, the probability of regional deterrence failure is increasing. The U.S. needs a force posture capable of simultaneously deterring both Russia and China. Finally, much of the infrastructure and industrial base that supports the Department of Defense and the National Nuclear Security Administration is out of date, unusable, and in some instances literally falling down. Both departments are struggling with supply chain issues, and neither have enough capacity to meet future requirements on a timely basis. Investment in infrastructure and rebuilding the supply chain and the workforce is needed urgently and will be needed in perpetuity. This is true for both the NNSA production and the scientific infrastructure, which we cannot ignore, and the DoD industrial base. So with that, I will turn it over to Senator Kyle. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. It bears repeating that our report is a consensus report. We have unanimously agreed on our findings and recommendations. Despite the fact that we are a pretty disparate group, this was possible primarily because the evidence is so clear. It's overwhelming, both with respect to the threat and pointing us in the direction of the things that the United States must do. One of our recommendations goes directly to the way that our recommendations could be implemented, namely through the support of the American people for change that the leaders of the country can then embrace in developing policy. So this recommendation goes directly to my former colleagues in the House and Senate and to the President and all the members of the executive. You must take this case to the American people. You must explain to them why this is so important. You must tell them that it will cost more money, but you must also explain, to put that in context, how that investment is pretty small in comparison to the importance of this endeavor, namely to hopefully preclude the possibility of a nuclear conflict involving the United States, China, or Russia. This is important for the people to understand and support. And without that support, we don't believe it likely that the Congress will do what it must do to effectuate these recommendations. So that's an explicit recommendation of the Commission. I want to dwell on just one moment on a specific that Madeline mentioned. Basically, we have developed a policy in this country to transition from legacy systems to modernized systems, both conventionally and with our nuclear force. And we're doing this, to use the commercial jargon, on a just-in-time basis. And that's primarily because the amount of time that it will take us to get ready to transition will use up all of the available time before the existing systems basically time out. Their lifespan, in many cases, has expired a long time ago. And through various workarounds, we've continued to ensure that they will help us provide the deterrent that we need. But we're out of workarounds. And we heard from many people, both representing the DoD side as well as the DOE side, that the timetables now represent some extraordinary challenges for us to be able to develop both the nuclear weapon capability, for example, and the platforms with which they are delivered to replace the current aspect of the triad is going to be a very difficult proposition because of the things that Madeline mentioned. Our national infrastructure has atrophied. Our workforce is not prepared for this. And we have supply chain issues that everybody's familiar with. This is one of the reasons we need a whole of government approach, because these things challenge other aspects of our government and commercial sector as well as our defense establishment. We've got to find answers for these things. And in order to do that, everyone in our government is going to have to contribute, as well as people in the private sector, and importantly, our scientific community. So that's why we say we're all in this game. But the concern that many of us have is that there could develop a deterrence gap between the time the new systems are ready to be fielded and the time that the old systems are no longer credible. That has to be avoided at all costs, and it generally means that decisions have to be made now for the next decade in order for us to achieve these timetables. As Madeline said, completing the program of record on our nuclear enterprise is an absolute necessity, but it is insufficient to meet the new challenges that have arisen since that original program was developed. And that's why, while we don't know everything that's going to be needed 10 years or 12 years from now, we do know that we have to get at the project right now to develop the capability to produce whatever will be needed. And on that, we have an absolute consensus among our commission members.
Thank you, sir. We will start at the far left, and I would just remind each commissioner to lean into the mic and use your command voice. Dr. Duffy.
Thank you, Bill. Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to express my appreciation to Speaker Emerita Pelosi for appointing me to this very important commission. Thank you to our Chair Madeline, to our Vice Chair John for their excellent leadership, to my fellow commissioners for their wisdom and collegiality throughout this process, and to Bill Chambers and the IDA team for the excellent work that's produced this consensus report. As we see from the unprovoked attack on Ukraine and in Israel, we live in a dangerous world. Countries and groups hostile to our values and those of our allies and friends have increasing military capabilities to threaten us and to cause harm. We must protect ourselves and our allies, and our report lays out strategies and recommendations for doing so. We call upon the President and our other leaders, echoing what Senator Kyle said, to educate the public about why we need to take these steps. We must, at the same time, always be the country to utilize soft power, diplomacy, and to offer proposals for arms control and other measures to reduce the risk of violence and the spread or use of nuclear or other weapons of mass destruction. But above all, we as a nation must be unified internally against the threats that we face. Thank you.
Thanks, Gloria. So let me also offer thanks to Chairman Mike Rogers and his senior staff on the House Armed Services Committee for appointing me to this distinguished panel. I enjoyed serving with my friend Rose, and I'm very pleased that we were able to come to a consensus agreement on a wide range of issues. A couple of brief points. I hope when you read the report, if you read the report, you will be seized with the repeated use of the term urgent or urgency. The Commission was very seized with not only the pace at which the threat was evolving, but also the challenges that we have in rising to meet that threat and the need for a true appreciation within both the executive and the Congress on the fact that urgent changes are needed. I will focus on four particular elements, some of which you will see and some of which you might tend to gloss over. First, in terms of the changes that are needed with regard to our strategic deterrent, you will find on page 48 a number of very clear recommendations, which include preparation to upload some or all of our hedge, which include a plan to deploy Sentinel in a MIRVed role, which include the need for planned increases in B-21 bombers, increases in the LRSO cruise missile replacement, increases in the planned production of Columbia-class submarines, increases in the number of B-21 bombers that are being pursued, and I think in very, very importantly, exploration of a road mobile ICBM option and a return to our bombers on strip alert, or at least planning to do so. With regard to theater nuclear forces, the Commission recommends that we both develop and deploy theater nuclear delivery systems, and we enumerate the various characteristics that those systems should have, and that both EUCOM and INDOPACOM are capable or need to become capable of integrated planning for the deterrent mission. Let me also just express appreciation to both Matt Koslow and to Greg Weaver, who were the 13th and 14th commissioners, and without whose expertise and help, this commission, I think, would not have been as successful as we've been. Another noteworthy recommendation that the Commission has made is that we depart from our traditional approach to missile defense, and that now we should develop and field a homeland missile defense that is capable of deterring and defeating coercive attacks by Russia and China. So that is another, I think, significant finding or recommendation of the Commission. Two areas which I urge you not to gloss over because they are quite important and the Commission spent a fair amount of time on them. First is the importance of alliances. The Commission says right up front that it is in our national interest to maintain and strengthen and, where appropriate, expand our network of alliances. Indeed, withdrawing from alliances, withdrawing from partnerships would directly benefit our adversaries, would invite aggression, and we ultimately might then have our security and our economic prosperity reduced and find ourselves forced to reverse such a decline. So please do focus on the alliance section. This is, again, a unanimous Commission report. Finally, I'm very pleased that for the first time, the Strategic Posture Commission has brought into the picture the importance of economic and financial statecraft. And what the Commission recommends, and this lends itself to authorization language, so I would encourage our authorizers here to look at this, but we believe that the Department of Defense has within the United States government the necessary planning capability that should be used to assist the Departments of State, Commerce, and Treasury in terms of thinking through how we would employ both financial measures such as sanctions, export controls, and other non-kinetic solutions to both shape and deter a future adversary. So I hope that a whole-of-government approach will be taken to this topic, and that the Treasury, I really hope, will welcome planning assistance from the Department of Defense to really think through in an iterative fashion, in a phased fashion, how these kinds of tools could be employed to head off a future conflict. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marshall, and indeed it's been a pleasure to serve with you and with all of my colleagues on this commission. I will just echo the great words of thanks to the IDA team, and I also wanted to express my thanks to the agencies I see represented around the room and the laboratories who briefed us, provided us a lot of information, and helped to form our recommendations and certainly form our view of the threat. So thank you to you in the audience who helped to turn out this report as well. The report is another interesting, I would say, development in my career. It represents the fact that we are a bipartisan consensus, no question about it. But when you look at this table, you also see that women and men are equally represented. And I found it a great pleasure to have a chairman in Madeleine Creedon and a vice chair in John Kyle, and to work with all of the commissioners across this dais, because it was, I think, perhaps an historic first that this commission was made up in a 50-50 way, on the bipartisan front, of course, but also on the balance front, and I welcome that very, very much. Obviously, the report is very hard-edged, and I agree with everything that's been said so far about the threat and our view of the threat. I also wanted to emphasize that, indeed, some of our recommendations are quite hard-edged, and Marshall Billingsley laid those out quite well. But I do want to say that the emphasis has been on planning for such eventualities in the view that, and here is the other part that is important about this report, in the view that it is possible to turn away from these threats and these eventualities should the overall environment change. The report goes out to 2035, but we are also very clear that some of the systems that we are looking at will still be in the course of deploying during the 2040s. The submarine modernization program, for example, will not wrap up until the 2040s. So we are looking at a long time horizon, and the emphasis in the report on continuing to treat risk reduction and diplomacy as fundamental and arms control negotiations as fundamental tools in the U.S. toolbox, I think this is also a very important message, and our chairman referred to that in her own remarks. So I think as we look to the future of this report, and I very much support Senator Kyle's emphasis on working not only with the Congress but also on with the executive branch to try to ensure that we are selling its results to the American people, I think that this will continue to be, I hope, a whole of government effort and a bipartisan effort, because it is that consensus that will drive us forward to be able to achieve the results that we think are necessary in this report. So thank you for the opportunity once again to speak with you today, and over to you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you, Rose. Good morning, everyone. I was honored and delighted to be able to serve on this commission with a talented group of friends and colleagues. I, too, want to express my appreciation to the chair and the vice chair, and especially to IDA, who did an incredible yeoman's work in supporting the activities over the last 18 or so months. So thank you very much for that. It has been an amazing experience, and know that our work will have an impact on our nation and on our allies and friends. I also want to thank everyone. I know it's been said, but I'd like to reiterate the fact that we see so many people, friends and colleagues, and international partners and allies in the room today. And it's because of your thoughtful consideration and the work that you do to maintain and support our national security, and the work we do together means that you clearly believe that the work we're doing is important, and hopefully you'll get out of this report as much as we put into it. Given that it is a consensus report, should send a clear message that the recommendations we made are essential to maintain our strategic deterrence and ensure that the current and future leaders clearly recognize the challenges and the path forward. As you might guess, there are clearly a number of specific issues on which I could speak this morning. Thanks, Marshall. You covered just about everything. But in keeping with the request that we speak to 1 to 2 minutes, Marshall, there is one underlying and foundational fact that I believe, if not actively implemented, will undermine our security and our freedoms, which we take for granted. Echoing what Senator Kyle said, and that is having leadership in both the executive and legislative branches communicate, not educate, but communicate effectively and consistently to the American public why all of this matters. Because U.S. global leadership matters. U.S. global leadership has given way to our current way of life, and a way of life that has been built on 80-plus years of freedom, and it is at risk. If we do not communicate this effectively and frequently to the American public, to our allies and our partners, those authoritarian regimes who are actively undermining world order will have their way. And this simply cannot happen. Finally, I was encouraged that over the last year, we agreed that this report shouldn't be a Washington read. Rather, and now I am a Floridian, I'm happy to say, so I'm outside the Beltway. It should be a document that should be provided to the American public as a primer for every American, our allies, and our partners, and those who have an interest in a future that continues to be based on a free and prosperous globe. To do anything less would undermine everything that we believe in. So thank you again. Thank you to the chair and the vice chair. Thank you for my colleagues. And I hope you will find the report as important as ever. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I also echo my thanks. I thank Ida. I thank the chair and the vice chair. I thank the 12 commissioners. Thank Senator Reed for appointing me, Senator Reed and Senator Inhofe for their continued support as we look at these issues. I think it's important that, number one, you read the document for yourself. Don't have somebody tell you what the document means. Read it for yourself, because we argued over every word in that document. We spent 5 minutes on will versus would at one case. It is important for you to understand holistically what we're trying to say as you go through that. So I encourage you to read the document. I think it's also important that you look at the 12 of us that are on the dais right here. These 12 people are very different people, but they have one very important thing in common, and that is that they care desperately about this country and our national security. We all have different viewpoints about how to deal with that concern, but we care desperately about this country. And that's why you hear Senator Kyle and Lisa Gordon Hagerty talking about communicating that to the American people, because it is the American people that make this country great. That's who we are. So it's important to walk through those things. When we look at the different ways we have of dealing with the problem, the one thing that we understand is it's a significant threat. We live in a very dangerous world. That dangerous world is on the news every day these days as you look at what's going on, and we have to figure out how to deal with that. It's also important to understand that a one-war construct is no longer viable. We continue to try to make that case that a one-war construct is somehow viable, and it's not. We have to deal with two peer adversaries at the same time. We have to deal with the other threats that are out there, North Korea, Iran, terrorism. We have to deal with all of that at the same time, and we can't just say that everything is lesser than included than a one-war threat. That's an irrational conclusion, and we do not buy into that. It's also important that we understand that the existence of nuclear weapons by themselves does not create an effective deterrent. The nuclear weapons must be safe, secure, effective, and reliable, but it must be integrated into our overall operations and combined with an effective conventional deterrent and an all-domain strategic deterrent in space, cyber, and electronic warfare, to look at all those other issues together to provide the effective deterrent. And that effective deterrent must be positioned correctly in the world so our adversaries see them and are deterred by them, and so they do not act in a way that would create that environment. That integration is key to our future. So again, I ask you to read the document for yourselves. I very much appreciate the opportunity to serve, and I look forward to the questions that you might have today, and I'll turn it over now to my friend Frank Miller.
Thanks, John, and welcome to all of you. I will be brief. I don't want to edit my colleagues' remarks or take anything away from anything that they've said. I endorse everything that they said. I will pick up John Hyten's point. Read the report, please. Read it and take it seriously. We certainly hope that the administration and the Hill take it seriously. It's, in addition to being a consensus report, a very robust document. It's got 131 findings and 81 recommendations, including an innovative arms control proposal that all future tests by the P5 of FOB systems be banned before these systems become operationally capable. There are two headlines I'd like you not to take away from here. One is that we're calling for more and more billions to be spent on nuclear weapons systems. If you look at what we say in the report, the near-term expenditures would be on conventional systems, on prompt strike, on tankers, and on the NNSA and Defense Industrial Base. Those are urgent requirements. The nuclear systems we talk about adding on are in the out years. The second thing I don't want you to take away from this, or I want you to be able to knock down the headline that will inevitably appear tomorrow, is that the Commission is talking about being able to fight nuclear wars. As Madeline said at the very beginning, this is about deterring and preventing war, deterring and preventing aggression. And I am just very pleased to have joined my 12 commissioners across the political spectrum in producing this. Bob?
Thank you, Frank.
Again, you're going to hear the same honor that was to serve on this commission with many people who I knew well, some people who I knew a little bit, and some people who I didn't know. And it was a tremendous experience for all of us to get together, share our different viewpoints, and come to a consensus on a range of critically important topics. Obviously, I'd like to thank Senator Schumer for nominating me. It was a great honor. And thanks to IDA and everybody else who helped, too numerous to mention by name, all of whom showed incredible intelligence, wisdom, and patience with the 12 of us up here. Obviously, I echo exactly what everyone else has said, and reading the report I think is important. We did think about every word in there, and word choice is important, and it's worth it to take a look. However, I will emphasize a couple of points that I think I would take from this. One, it is important to note that currently we have assessed that our strategic posture is sufficient. However, the security environment is clearly changing and becoming more dangerous. And that was the context in which we had to take action and make recommendations. The current program of record must be continued, but I think as the chair ably said and others, it was built to address a different threat than the one we will face in the time frame we were asked to examine. We did not think it was our role to give recommendations on specific decisions or systems, but to really highlight capabilities and broad approaches to how these problems needed to be addressed into the future. And perhaps most importantly, in order to be able to adjust any of these programs in any direction, the U.S. must make decisions now, echoing the word urgent, and I would also add creatively, to take a look at the infrastructure, the support pieces, and all of the decisions that can be made now so that future decisions and future decision makers can be able to implement different choices as they see the threat environment emerge. But to wait for that changed threat environment, to wait until you get to those points, it will be too late to make those decisions if the U.S. government hasn't already put in place certain pieces of infrastructure and decisions today. And finally, we have talked considerably about the consensus of this document. That is not only because of the surprise maybe each one of our commissioners came to that we could create it, but in fact, it is very much the focus of what we wanted to make sure came out of this. We may not each individually answer specific questions in the same way. And certainly this is a report that each one of us individually would have written differently. But what's critically important is that we all came to the consensus and the understanding that we needed to focus on what we could agree on and what the clear actions that we wanted to urge the U.S. administration and U.S. Congress to take now in order to deal with the threats that we saw into the future. Again, thank you all. I encourage you to read the report. It's not necessarily a quick read, but we hope it's a good read. Thank you. Matt.
Great. Well, good morning. Thank you all for coming out this morning. I'd also like to thank IDA, the chair and the vice chair, and my fellow commissioners. In my minute and a half, I'd like to make 4 points, one about strategy, one about strategic forces, one about theater forces, and one about missile defense. First on strategy, there have been some arguing that to deal with this two-threat environment, the United States needs to fundamentally rethink its nuclear strategy, maybe move to targeting innocent civilians, and we reject that. We say, quote, "The fundamentals of America's deterrence strategy remain sound, but the application of that strategy must change to address the 2027 to 2035 threat environment. As long as the Chinese and Russian regimes maintain their current autocratic structures and dangerous policies, this means holding at risk key elements of their leadership, the security structure maintaining the leadership and power, their nuclear and conventional forces, and their war-supporting industry. Later, we say the U.S. should, quote, "continue the practice and policy of not directly targeting civilian populations and adhere to the law of armed conflict and nuclear planning and operations." On strategic forces, we say, quote, "the U.S. strategic nuclear force posture should be modified to address the larger number of targets due to the growing Chinese nuclear threat, address the possibility that China will field large-scale counterforce-capable missile forces that pose a threat to the U.S. strategic nuclear forces, assure the United States continues to avoid reliance on executing ICBM launch under attack, and account for advances in Russian and Chinese integrated air and missile defenses. We therefore say the following strategic nuclear force posture modification should be pursued with urgency, and Marshall already mentioned these, but I think it's important, so I'll repeat. Prepare to upload some or all of the nation's hedge warheads, plan to deploy the Sentinel ICBM in a MIRV configuration, increase the planned number of deployed long-range standoff weapons, increase the planned number of B-21 bombers, increase the planned production of Columbia SSBNs and their Trident ballistic missile systems, pursue the feasibility of fielding some portion of the future ICBM force in a road mobile configuration, and initiate planning and preparations for a portion of the future bomber fleet to be on continuous alert status. Moving third to non-strategic forces, we say additional U.S. theater nuclear capabilities will be necessary in both Europe and the Indo-Pacific regions to deter adversary nuclear use and offset local conventional superiority. These additional theater capabilities will need to be deployable, survivable, and variable in their available yield options. Fourth point, missile defense. The United States should develop and field homeland integrated air and missile defense capabilities that can deter and defeat coercive attacks by Russia and China. And later we say if any of these capabilities prove feasible, the department should pursue deployment with urgency. And then final point, final line of the report, the challenges are unmistakable, the problems are urgent, the steps are needed now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to start by thanking Ranking Member Adam Smith for appointing me to this commission and for his leadership on these issues. And I would like to thank Madeleine Creedon and Senator Kyle for their indefatigable leadership in getting us to consensus on this report in just over a year. And it was really a pleasure to serve with my fellow commissioners. We had really robust debates. We haggled over wording. I think in certain instances, the details in the wording matter. But we did come together, and I'm really proud to be part of this report and more importantly, this bipartisan consensus on a way forward to address changing threats. And I also want to thank the government officials and experts who were so generous with their time and really contributed to a very candid and transparent discussion with us on what the challenges are and what the challenges are that they face, as well as for the input from our allies on this important process. So I just want to make 3 quick points. One is that the threat is more complex. And it's not just because the nuclear threats are increasing, but we're also seeing new domains, space and cyber, that are complicating strategic deterrence. And we've talked about this several times on the Commission. This is not the nuclear posture report, it's the strategic posture report. In this vein, there are new tools that we should be using, including one of the recommendations is looking at how we can better prepare to have plans for sanctions that matter, and that the Department of the Treasury should adopt a similar process that the military uses for planning and to have different options in place and understanding what the impacts and effects would be of using those sanctions as an example of a new tool. I also want to thirdly talk about the importance of innovation. This was an important piece of the report that details how we must leverage and prioritize using emerging technologies and innovation and fostering the culture and acquisition process that will allow us to partner with the private sector. And specifically, the report notes that in order to prevent strategic surprise and fully leverage emerging technologies, the United States must foster a culture and economy of innovation, both at home and among allies and partners. And effectively leveraging U.S. and allied innovation requires both a cultural and bureaucratic shift in order to overcome legacy approaches not suited to leveraging new technologies. And with that, again, I want to reiterate my thanks to my commissioners, to our chair and co-chair, and turn it over to Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Also echoing great thanks to the IDA team for the work that they did, to Matt Koslow and to Greg Weaver for their support for the Commission's work, and then also to Chairman Mike Rogers for the appointment to this critically important commission. I'm going to foot stomp some of the points already made and then just make a couple of different ones just to draw your attention to some other specific points. One, it's really important to know how we came to consensus. It's not just that we all looked at the same problems together, but we constantly talked about what it was we were trying to do. What is it that we're trying to defend? And so in the stakes section, we really worked hard to try to convey that to the American people directly, and to policymakers so that we can explain why this is so important. We are trying to defend a U.S.-led order that we still all agree is worth defending. And in this particular climate in our country, we believe that that was a very, very important point to make, that we do not take it for granted that that is something worth defending. And so that was our mission. And then a few points. One, the big theme of not closing doors now for decisions that this country might want to make in the future. So we were really trying hard to ensure that the United States does not make decisions now or fail to make decisions that inadvertently closes doors for things that we might need to do in the years to come. But it's not all about just the future. There are things that we stress urgently for the now. On page 48, we state very clearly that the U.S. theater nuclear force posture should be urgently modified. And then we explain why that is. And so I would draw your attention to that on page 48. The other critically important point that several of my colleagues brought up was on the matter of U.S. missile defense. If you look to page 106, we describe that what the Secretary of Defense ought to do. The Secretary of Defense should direct research, development, test, and evaluation into advanced IAMD capabilities, leveraging all domains, including land, sea, air, and space. These activities should focus on sensor architectures, integrated command and control, interceptors, cruise and hypersonic missile defenses, and air or point defenses. And then this is the important line. This is not just a research project. If any of these capabilities prove feasible, the department should pursue deployment with urgency. And then my last point is really to please notice really the tone of the entire report. That we were very adamant that we can look with clear eyes at the threats, at the cost in order to defend against the threats, but that we also have a strong sense of optimism. We are not defeatist. We understand that the challenges are great, but they can and must be dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you all, Commissioners. We open it now for questions. We would ask you to wait for a mic, identify yourself and your organization, and then stand and ask your question. Sir, in the front row.
Hi, I'm Michael Gordon, Wall Street Journal. A question for Rose. There's a phrase in this report that wasn't read out that says the defense strategy to address the two nuclear peer threat requires a U.S. nuclear force that is either larger in size, different in composition, or both. And so that I sense that language was drafted to enable consensus among people who might have different views on that. At the same time, the document says a larger number of targets needs to be covered and specific steps need to be taken to increase the bomber force, long-range strike, SLBMs. So my question for to you, Rose, is as the negotiator of the New START Treaty, do you think that these prospective threats can be accompanied, handled within New START levels? What would need to happen for that to occur in terms of the world situation or arms control? And isn't really the report weighted toward, the way I've read it, a larger number of weapons? And I just wanted to throw in a very quick question to Frank Miller. A big point is the need to deter simultaneous threats. However, apart from front-loading expenditures on prompt global strike tankers or the nuclear infrastructure, there doesn't appear to be any obvious prioritization in this report or trade-offs identified, and what is going to be a massive undertaking if you're talking about building up conventional forces for 2 theaters and extending the nuclear modernization program. Isn't a document that doesn't identify any trade-offs and doesn't establish any priorities more of a wish list than a recipe for what the country needs to do?
Rose.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. There are actually 3 potential avenues that the report points to, and it says very clearly, since U.S. defense strategy to address the 2 nuclear peer threat will require a U.S. nuclear force that is larger in size, different in composition, postured differently, or all 3, and then it stresses what we've all been saying, decisions must be made now to meet deterrent requirements by the mid-2030s. And I think it's important, again, to come back to the point that we were asked to look out to 2035 when many things can happen in the world. And as I mentioned also in my remarks, we know that the modernization of the triad will unfold throughout the 2030s and into the 2040s. So we were looking at, as a commission, a long period of time. And my answer to your question is, first of all, New START limitations remain in force until 2026, unless, and the Biden administration has been very clear about this, the Russians step beyond them. Already, they are not implementing the treaty properly, and we consider them to be in violation of the treaty because they have ceased to allow on-site inspection and other implementation measures. But they are holding to the limits. The United States can hold to the limits and will hold to the limits until that time. But bear in mind, again, that we were already in the beyond New START period in thinking about the future of the force posture, but also thinking about what future possibilities might be there for arms control measures. I cannot tell you what that potential might be in the mid-2030s, and I think we just have to somewhat live with that uncertainty, but leave open that potential because the world may change.
Frank.
Michael, let me start.
Lean in, please.
Let me start by saying that I think that deterring in 2 theaters requires different kinds of forces. I think Europe is ground heavy, and in Europe we are aided by large and extremely capable allied naval and air forces. In the Pacific, that campaign would largely be a naval and air campaign aided by, again, extremely capable allies such as the Australians, the Japanese, and the Koreans. So first of all, I don't think it's that much of a massive undertaking to bulk up the force. Second, we're talking about, and we say in the report, funding needs to be prioritized, and long-range non-nuclear precision strike programs must be accelerated. There is an Army-Navy program which is slowly going through testing and which is slowly looking at deployment in the 2025 period and beyond, which could be accelerated if the service chiefs paid attention to it. So that's not a massive undertaking. Buying more tankers is something which is just common sense. I will go speak for myself, not my fellow commissioners. I can't, for the life of me, understand why the Air Force doesn't do that. But again, that is not a massive undertaking. A more difficult undertaking will be to completely overhaul the NNSA complex and the defense industrial base. But that has to happen regardless. So, no, I don't think this is a wish list at all. I think this is achievable within some modest, and I underscore modest increases to the defense budget, because we simply do have to be able to deter in both theaters, where our allies are threatened by very aggressive regimes which have territorial ambitions, and the possibility of an opportunistic arrangement or a planned arrangement which could come with great surprise is a real possibility. So I think it is not a wish list at all.
Other questions? Sir, in the back, yes.
Hello, I'm Tat Blackburn from the Institute of Defense Analysis, and I'd like to thank all the commissioners here for the hard work put into this report that I'm really looking forward to reading. But my question to you is concerning the fact it seems like this was a very much a threat-based analysis that the commission undertook. So concerning one of those threats, how did the war in Ukraine, Russia's activities there, and the future conventional and strategic force posture for Russia affect the work of the commission in the review? Thank you.
Madeline.
Oh, thank you for that. Well, obviously, it was on everybody's mind, and it clearly demonstrated the very aggressive nature in Russia, and it shaped a lot of what we thought about, particularly with respect to conventional force structures, which are absolutely necessary to deter any sort of a nuclear aggression. And it was a lot of the various comments that have been made throughout the course of this war with respect to threats about nuclear use at any level that really did inform a lot of our thinking. But it also really emphasizes the importance of conventional. In other words, to deter any conflict, you have to deter the conflict from starting to begin with. I mean, you don't want it to go nuclear, but you don't want the conflict at all. And to be able to do this full scope deterrence, you need conventional forces, you need a whole of government, and you need that nuclear force structure in the background to be the ultimate deterrent. But the Ukraine war has demonstrated the importance of that full scope deterrent concept, and it's also demonstrated why allies are so important to us. Oh, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Dasdy Walter.
Hey, Drew Walter, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear Matters. Good to see you all. Thank you for what I think is going to be a very impactful report. I know it was a pleasure for many of us to brief the commission and share where the departments are headed. I will say a lot of what we heard today has been active discussion within the Nuclear Weapons Council and other fora within the two departments. I guess I'll ask a question related to the sense of urgency. How do leaders in positions both in Congress and in the administration today help instill that sense of urgency down into the system to take urgent action? Many of you were leaders in various places in these different places. Based on your experiences, how best can we translate that sense of urgency and imperative down into the system to get urgent action? Thank you.
First thing is to begin to try to do that. Neither our presidents nor our congressional leaders have in recent times gone to the American people to tell them the truth about what's going on in terms of the challenges that we face and the kind of expenditures and projects that we're going to have to develop to meet these challenges. I understand why. I used to be one of those people, and there are other things to think about that are more interesting to our constituents and less scary, perhaps. But the American people are pretty smart, even though they have to spend their time, providing for their families and their future and so forth. If you explain to them that we've got a real problem and we need to deal with it, they'll respond to that. The problem is we haven't tried yet. I won't be partisan here to criticize presidents, but presidents of both parties have failed to use the biggest megaphone that exists, their platform, to explain why we have to fight these battles, why we have to spend this money. and what it's going to cost and why that expenditure in the overall context of things is a very small amount of money if this is the most serious thing that the government has to deal with. And congressional leaders, I understand their reluctance to get into these discussions. First of all, they'll be pretty lonely when they do, and the audience won't be all that interested, and they might be a little bit scared. And besides that, they're more interested in some domestic issues than they are these kinds of issues. And there's also the concern about why we have to continue to be a leader in the global order. Well, we do, and our commission took that on directly. We explained why it was so important for the United States to maintain this position of leadership by being actively involved. Our leaders today won't talk about that. It's not hard to talk about it when you see the evidence. As you said, the evidence is pretty clear. So it's a pretty easy case to make if you want to try to make it. But leadership is about being a leader, not just being a follower of public opinion. And that means that the leaders have to help communicate these important matters to the American people. It just takes courage and some ambition, I guess.
I want to add to that. Drew, one of the things that we heard frequently as we engaged across the executive branch was an acknowledgement of the complexity and the challenges that different program managers, different people responsible for executing different parts of this highly intricate and interconnected enterprise, they recognized the challenges they faced, and their solution was to project optimism, but not to give us concrete paths forward to achieve success. And so we really found, I think others might echo this too, we found it commendable that there was this sense of optimism, this sense that we'll figure it out somehow. But one of the things that you and others charged with the enterprise can do is to not accept at face value the optimism, but rather demand sometimes very difficult and hard solutions.
Okay, right, second row there, yes.
Hi, I'm Liz Muir. I'm from the Estonian Embassy. I would like to ask more specifically about the role of allies and partners, in particular in the European theatre. How do you see the US role in the European theatre, and in particular looking at the NATO deterrence and defense posture, including the mix of nuclear and conventional and the role of allies, especially taking into account that the importance of the nuclear dimension in the Russian posture is likely to further increase as they try to compensate for the shortfall in their conventional power. Thank you so much.
Madeline?
Well, thank you for that, and I'm sure several of our commissioners will also want to respond to your question. So several of us here, not the least of which was Rose, who actually was the deputy at NATO for a while, but Bob Scheer and I also had the pleasure, and I think even Frank did once upon a time, of even Frank, just so long ago, of chairing the high-level group at NATO. So, you know, I think we have significant both understanding of the importance of our allies and of the role in the U.S. that provides that nuclear deterrent that to the overall NATO partnership. I think it's pretty instructive as well that one of the very first nuclear modernization programs was in fact the B-61-12, which is the warhead for Europe. But we can all do more. And I think that this is one of the things that this report takes on is, yes, allies are important, and they're very important, and they're important to us, and we're important to our allies, and alliances are important, but we probably don't fully utilize all of our respective strengths. So thinking about, planning about how we coordinate more with allies, how we integrate more with allies. You know, we talk a lot about the U.S. being integrated amongst its forces, but we also have to really think hard about how we bring allies closer, how we become closer with allies, and how all of our allies also become closer and provide capabilities, and really look at who can do what, who can provide what capabilities, and be quite serious about this. So yeah, they are important. They're important in Europe, and they're also important in the Asia-Pacific region. So I'll open it to any of my others.
Perhaps I'll just pick up very briefly. I think Madeline's points about the capabilities that allies can provide, they were very, very much discussed by our group, and the necessity of close cooperation, coordination, and integration between the North Atlantic allies, the United States and Canada, and the European allies in Europe, in NATO. But interesting also, I think there was a general reflection on the value that NATO European allies provide to the extended deterrent mission, not only the basing countries, but also those countries that provide for the so-called supporting missions to the extended nuclear deterrent missions, like the snowcat missions, those types of things. So I think we did have a good discussion of the allied role. I will just say that I think we were able to pay equal attention to the allies in NATO Europe and in Asia. Of course, I've had my special responsibilities with regard to NATO, but I was glad to see that we had a very, very strong balance in our discussions over the months of the situations for the allies in Europe as well as in Asia, and I think that was an important aspect of our discussion.
There are a number of very specific findings and recommendations that we make with regard to the allies. Having been a NATO Assistant Secretary General, I can't stress how important and how valuable the interventions, the commentary provided by your ambassador and other ambassadors to us were. We would like to, and we support strengthening of the nuclear planning group, and there's a number of things that we say regarding that. We'd like to see the operational effectiveness of the dual capable aircraft increased. We also would like to see additional exercises with more allied participation, broader allied participation. But let me also tell you, we make a very pointed comment here about the fact that allies need to do more to meet their spending obligations. Not an issue for you in Estonia. You're well above the 2%, and thank you for that. But we have a number of allies who are failing to honor their obligations, and they really need to step up. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Second row.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Is this on?
Yes, sir.
All right. Daryl Kimball. I'm with the Arms Control Association. Good to see you all. I appreciate the opportunity back in December to speak with many of you about these issues. I have a question in two parts. Michael Gordon was asking the question about prioritization of the expenditure of resources on some of the items you outlined. I have a question about pacing, because I'm getting a little confused as I hear the variations on the recommendations and findings of the report. This is a report that looks out to 2035. Senator Kyle, you mentioned a concern about a deterrence gap. You've outlined a number of things that could be done relating to enhancing the U.S. force, including, this is page 48, which I've not seen, changes to the strategic deterrent, uploading increasing numbers of each leg of the triad, considering road mobile, returning bombers to strip alert, et cetera, et cetera. What, can you give us an idea of when certain of these moves might be made, and in response to what kinds of changes in the threat environment? Between now and 2035 is a long period of time. So are you suggesting that all these things be done quickly, or some things could be done later? As you all very well know, uploading can take place relatively quickly. It's a lot easier than building additional B-21s or SSBNs. So if you could give us an idea about pacing. Second, these are rather ambitious goals. Did the Commission consider how our adversaries might respond to plans to pursue these steps, or actually taking these steps, and how would they respond to these particular recommendations about enhancing the U.S. capability. Thanks.
General Hyde.
So I'll start. Thanks very much for the questions. So we spent enormous amounts of time talking about pacing or phasing how we walk through this. And Frank Miller walked through a lot of it at the beginning in his opening remarks. And it's important to think about the way we structure it. And when you read the report, I think you'll be able to see the whole thing much more clearly than we can just in a short description. But fundamentally, there's things that we have to do in the near term to allow this nation the ability to deal with the uncertain future, because there's no way you can predict 2030 and 2035 to any specificity right now. All we can tell is it's a very dangerous world, becoming more dangerous, and the trends are in the wrong direction. We don't know that 2026 and beyond will be without New START, but we say in the report it's most likely going to be a world without that kind of arms control. So we have to be prepared for that. So we talk about exercising uploads in the near term. We talk about preparing Sentinel to deal with a multiple independent reentry vehicle, a MIRV capability as we walk through that. Those things have to be exercised now to demonstrate that if we go into that world where there is a breakout in the future, we have the ability to quickly do that. Those things have to be done in the near term as we go through that. When we look at the NNSA and the Department of Energy, that structure right now can't deal with the kind of capabilities that we may need in the 2030s. So if we don't spend that money today and we don't deal with that in a completely fully funded, year-to-year supported structure, we will not be ready to deal with the 2030s. We talk about, on page 48, we've had a couple commissioners read the elements on page 48 that talk about the bombers, that talk about the others. Those capabilities right now will have to be required. But as Frank said, those funding will not be implemented until the 2030s and beyond. But if you take steps right now that avoid that structure, you put the nation in a very bad spot. So we clearly say these are what you have to do now to be ready for the uncertain future. If you ask us to look for the future, this is what we see. That structure that we've just described, I think the pacing and the phasing is reasonable and structured as you go through that. And the Commission spent an enormous amount of time making sure we understood where that was going. And the second part of your question again?
How will adversaries respond to these specific moves? Will they match it with counter moves? And did you assess that in depth?
We assessed that in depth. To me, that's a little bit of a question that's very endemic of the challenges we've had in dealing with deterrence in the 21st century. Because the way we looked at the problem wasn't about what the adversaries are going to do, because the adversaries are always going to do something. This was about what the United States needs to do in order to improve our deterrent policy and our deterrent capabilities based on what we see the adversaries doing. So there always will be an action and a reaction with our adversaries. This is not about an appeasement structure. This is not about making somebody happy. This is about creating a deterrent capability that improves the United States security, that improves the security of our allies and partners around the world by strengthening our deterrent as we go forward. Now, I'll just say from my own personal perspective, if President Xi and President Putin happen to read this document and be upset about it, I would say that we did a pretty good job.
Could I put some further thoughts on that? It was Ash Carter in 2017, after he left office, said that there is a nuclear arms race, but only Russia and China are running in it. The notion that a U.S. reaction to Russian and Chinese nuclear modernization programs, which began in the 2010s, that our reaction to that, which in fact is not going to place new forces in the field until the 2030s, when new Russian and Chinese, and indeed North Korean forces are already in the field, puts this in a topsy-turvy relationship. We have to do what we have to do because we are reacting to the increasing danger in the world, which is embodied by Vladimir Putin's aggressive intentions against his neighbors and Xi Jinping's aggressive intentions against his neighbors in the South China Sea. We are the reactor at this point. We are not leading this. And so to say that Russia and China might take this wrong, I think, is to completely misunderstand the entire problem.
You reinterpreted my question, Frank, and you all haven't quite answered the question that I asked in a straightforward way.
Okay, so I'll try to answer your question in a very straightforward way. What we are doing is calling for strengthening America's deterrent. We're not calling for building up the force so that it's as much as China and Russia together. We're talking about taking incremental steps to build up our own capabilities. What China and Russia do, they will do on their own. And they will likely do, not out of a reaction to what we do, but because they have thought out policies and doctrines that they've been following for years. Is that a straightforward answer?
Okay. Other questions?
Can I just quickly weigh in on this? And I think the nuance here is in the words, and you'll see that when you read the report. But the emphasis is on taking actions now to be able to plan. It's not necessarily take these actions and make these decisions to upload or MERV now. And so it's allowing the flexibility depending on where the threat goes. I think as Rose said in her opening remarks, right, the report looked at the time frame 2027 to 2035. There's a lot of uncertainty. We see the threat growing, but the report also calls for increased risk reduction and arms control. And so so there might be ways to mitigate the threats and again, to convince our adversaries that increasing their numbers and increasing their nuclear modernization is not the way to go. But just wanted to emphasize, again, when you read the report, you know, this was, for example, a section where the words were important, but we did come to consensus on this recommendation.
Yes, sir.
Caleb Dixon, American Enterprise Institute. This is a question for the Commission as a whole. Focusing on our current ballistic missile interceptors, we've seen some mixed rate of success in the hit-to-kill ratio. Given the slow rate of development for the current model, does this report have any recommendations to speed up the rate of testing, innovation, and interceptor deployment in this sector?
I'll take the first crack at it. The primary discussion of the current deterrent of missile defense relates to North Korea. And our recommendation there is that the ground-based system will need to be increased to keep pace with the development of the North Korean threat. Beyond recommending that we needed to be able to keep pace with that threat, I don't recall any other specific recommendations regarding the current ground-based system.
There's a recommendation in the report to fully support and modernize the next generation interceptor and keep pace with the North Korean threat. That's the way it's written in the actual report on the near term.
Could I add one small, oh, sorry, Matt.
Yeah, but I don't want to also lose, there's another aspect to this. It isn't all about the ground-based interceptors, which we did all agree need to continue on their modernization, need to move to an NGI, need to work, need to be more uniform. But we also looked at integrated air and missile defense writ large and found that one of the things that we really need to do is we really need to think about integrated air and missile defense from a U.S. perspective and looking at where are those vulnerabilities, where is the critical infrastructure, where are the places that need to be protected with an integrated air and missile defense system to protect the U.S. from a coercive attack. And that is equally important to the ground-based interceptors that are primarily focused on North Korea. So, Rose, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that in that term, integrated air and missile defense, we are including not only defense against ballistic missile threats, but also air-breathing threats, hypersonic. That's clearly picked out in the recommendations of the report. And it was very carefully fashioned that we stuck with that concept of integrated air and missile defense in order to be able to talk about the missile threat spectrum, which is very much on display sadly in Gaza today, and we've seen it very much in Ukraine as well. So I think it's an important recommendation of this group that we be paying attention to this full spectrum of missile threats that are now out there and so evidently playing a role in the current conflicts that are going on.
Let me when you read the report on page 73, you will also find that we recommend that the Secretary of Defense, by October 1 of 2024, transfer to the military departments the operations and sustainment responsibilities to relieve MDA of that obligation so that MDA can properly focus on research, development, prototyping, and testing.
Yes, sir, right here. Microphone. Brad.
I wonder if you could comment on discussions the committee had or things that are in the report regarding
A little differently to figure out how to do them a little more efficiently. And with that,
One of the clear things you'll see in the report is that we walk down the path Madeline did, but then we make an interesting branch, I'll say, and the point is that innovation in this country, especially in the national security sector, used to come primarily from the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. That's not necessarily the case in the 21st century. Much of the innovation is coming from the commercial sector. We talk about artificial intelligence, quantum computing. We talk about a number of different things where the technology is being led in the commercial sector, and our federal government is not doing a good job in figuring out how to transition that critical capability, those advances that are happening, into our national security infrastructure. We make recommendations on what we should do according to that, but that is a critical piece of the puzzle, not just inside the department, but how do we leverage capabilities outside the department as well.
Could I make a small remark?
Yes.
I just wanted to thank my colleague Marshall Billingsley for reminding me of a very specific but I think important technology recommendation in the report, and that is we should continue to work to improve our verification technologies, monitoring and verification technologies for arms control treaties and agreements. And that was a clear consensus across the group. I think it speaks once again to the point I made at the outset that we see the whole arena of arms control, monitoring and verification, and the other aspects of diplomacy as being an essential part of the U.S. toolkit, a fundamental part of the U.S. toolkit, and we hope that it will be productive going forward. Can't tell right now, as several of the commissioners have mentioned, but we do hope that it will be productive going forward, and we need to prepare for that by continuing to do the research that is necessary to ensure we have the technology capable of playing a role in the future. And just last final point, our colleague Gloria Duffy had to leave for an early flight to get back to the West Coast, but her presence on the commission as someone very much situated in the world of Silicon Valley was especially important, I think, in bringing out these issues to do with science and technology, R&D, new technologies. I wanted to give her credit for being a real voice for that on this commission.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Just want to foot stomp what has already been said. Part of our confidence that some of these recommendations were doable and achievable in the defense sphere is because we were looking just over to see what commercial was already doing, and some of the things that we could see could be applied in the kinds of capabilities and things that we were trying to do. So that was a constant, repeated theme throughout all of our discussions. Lisa?
Thank you. And thanks for the question, Brad. There's another fundamental issue associated with ensuring that we have second to none science and technology and keep the foundation that NNSA and the defense enterprise has built over these several decades, and that's the infrastructure. And that goes without saying, but it's important to remind everyone that the infrastructure, at least in the nuclear security enterprise, is actually, nominally 50 years old across the board. And when you look at that, how can you provide or how can you attract the best and the brightest, if you will, whether they're postdocs or they're technicians or welders or what have you, to support the nuclear security enterprise across NNSA and the Department of Defense if you don't provide them with state-of-the-art tools and equipment and infrastructure in order to do so? You ask somebody to come in and work in a 70-plus-year-old facility, they will come because they know the importance of our national security mission and the imperative. So it's providing all of those tools and capabilities and providing the expertise necessary. But in order to do so, you also have to have that infrastructure. And that's one of the very, very, very important sections, if you'll read that, about why it's important across the board to be able to maintain the nuclear security enterprise and take it to the next level.
Thank you. We're rapidly approaching the 90-minute point, and I want to make sure we've got everybody. Okay. Madeline, would you like to wrap us up?
Well, thank you. And again, just thank you all for coming. Thank you for the questions. This experience on this commission has been truly remarkable. At the outset, it was not at all clear that we would get here today, but I think part of the reason we did really is the complete commitment that this whole group has, whatever the perspective is, whatever the individual thoughts are. But the perspective of this group is that we as a nation need to do things differently. We as a nation need to do more, and achieving the consensus on these recommendations about laying out the strategy for the future was absolutely essential to all of us. I mean, we recognize the divisive nature of things on the Hill. We recognize the divisive nature of things going on in our society, and we wanted to prove that you can actually reach a bipartisan consensus on matters of great national urgency. And I think we did that. And for that, I thank every single one of my commissioners and thank my vice chair. And also thank Ida for helping us along this path. Sir Kyle.
Thank you.
That's right.